Okay, I have been using all of you for some time now. Let me explain. I have been doing some deep inner exploration using this podcast. I have had another opportunity to have the dark night of the soul where I've gone into the cave to unlayer or unhook or heal from another layer of some very old trauma. This is going to be a real and raw look at my process to get to where I am sharing with you right now. This is not about me complaining. It is me just being honest and showing you in real time what it actually looks like to go through the process of doing the deep inner work. So I'm Kim Gross, and I'm the host of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I'm so glad that you are here. So here's the thing. This is not about me complaining. It is about showing, especially as a recovering perfectionist, that it is absolutely okay and normal to be a hot mess. We can all be a hot mess at times. And so that's what I'm sharing with you is my imperfection. And what I want to also share with you throughout this episode is to really model for you what it looks like going through my process of doing the work, and to show you that if you avoid the discomfort that you might be experiencing in your own life, what can happen. And I'll share with you what potentially could have happened if I continued to just push down and ignore my own discomfort. So what I started to realize is that the way that I use my checklists, the way that I use my to-do list, and even at times the way that I show up toward the podcast, I use them as distractions to avoid pain and discomfort. So here's the thing. I love creating episodes for this podcast. I've been doing it for 5.5 years. I really do love creating content, and I love sharing my experience, my strength, and my hope with all of you. And the truth is that at times, doing this podcast and my business can be almost like a strategy for me to avoid uncomfortable feelings. I realized that when I had absolutely nothing planned for my day, my anxiety would rise because I'm like, what am I going to do? I have absolutely nothing going on for today. And I would quickly go into this place of being busy. I would have this urge, this impulse, this desire to get myself busy. Being productive became this really quick fix. It creates a sense of competence because if I'm checking off my list and I'm getting shit done all the time, I'm feeling super competent. Needing help or wanting something done, they're like, okay, Kim's the go-to person. She can get shit done. So there's a sense of competence from being uber productive. It gives an endorphin hit when I'm productive and I see that my list is all checked off. Check, 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 it's completed. Or if I've just gone and cleaned my car and I spent 30 minutes drying every single part of it, there's this endorphin hit that I receive from that productivity. And the third thing that productivity does is that it actually covers or masks an unmet need of loneliness, sadness, and for me, a sense of melancholy. And so my subconscious mind developed this strategy a long time ago when I was just a little girl. Around the age of 10, actually, is when I started to perform, perfect, and to please, because those things gave me validation and I was being productive. So if I was performing, if I was perfecting, I was getting the validation, and there was almost this pseudo way of meeting an unmet need. Unhealthy, of course, subconscious, of course, but it is a strategy that I developed very early on. So anytime I was feeling disconnected, if I was feeling lonely, if I felt unseen, if I felt misunderstood, I went to this place of, okay, let me go perfect, perform, and please. Instead of leaning in and asking for what I truly needed or addressing the unmet need, I learned to just suppress my needs. I was like, oh, okay, I don't have any needs. I'm just going to discount my needs, disassociate from them, and pretend as if they don't even exist. So I just ended up becoming more of an avoidant. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. Especially when I was a young girl, I would much rather deny that I had needs than to come off as being a needy person, because in my mind, I had a belief system that being needy meant that I would be pathetic or weak. I know that sounds awful to say, but that is definitely the belief I had. So I'd much rather be off on my own island, acting as if I had no needs at all. And of course, what I ended up doing was pleasing, performing, and perfecting, because at least I was getting some validation. The validation became this form of pseudo connection. It felt okay if I'm receiving praise, if I'm receiving affirmations, it felt like in some ways that I was feeling connected to the people who were giving me the validation. The problem is that when the validation wasn't coming, then the feelings of disconnection, the loneliness, unworthiness was still there. You know what I mean? It never went away just because I was perfecting and I was getting validation and I had all these accolades. It never really took that pain or discomfort away. It was always still there. In fact, the pain, the pattern continued into my adulthood and into my business. That's why I'm sharing this episode with you right now, because it still is rearing its head. Even though I have done a ton of work on myself, the patterns still show up. So, can you start to see now a little bit as to why I would use my business and my podcast to try and get that same sense of validation and closeness? I'm trying to get the validation through the likes, the subscribers, the followers, the comments, the engagement. I approach it the same way I approached getting good grades in school, or the way that I approached sports. It was like hustling. I was trying to prove and earn a connection from other people. And as I said, inevitably that failed, because it just doesn't work that way.
Hey, it's Kim here, interrupting your regularly scheduled podcast episode to let you know about an opportunity to go deeper into this work. I invite you to head over to Amazon.com and pick up your copy of my book, Free to Be: A Pathway to Inner Liberation. If you are looking to unhook from people pleasing and perfectionistic patterns, if you're looking to have a better way of identifying your patterns and then how you can unhook so you can be free to step outside your comfort zone, free to have more meaningful relationships in your life, free to be your true self without hiding behind a mask any longer. If you desire any of this, then I encourage you to pick up your copy. And if you enjoy my book as much as I loved writing it, please go on over and leave a review on Amazon. You can leave a star review or written review. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcast episode.
So, what I want to share with you now is the first step of my 5-step power pathway is for those of you who are new to this podcast and new to this episode. Thank you so much for being here. The 5-step power pathway that I created is the process that I use over and over again to take myself through all of my inner work. It's how I do my healing work. The first step is always about being aware of the pattern. That's why P is for pattern, awareness of your patterns. If you aren't aware of how things are showing up for you, if you aren't aware that these behaviors are your patterns, you're not going to change anything. You're just going to keep doing this over and over again and then say, why is my life not changing? Why are things still like this? Somebody changed this for me. So you have to recognize, and that's why I became fully aware that whenever I was feeling boredom or lonely, I was feeling triggered, and then I would go right into getting myself busy. Or I would just stay busy so that I didn't have to get to that place of feeling boredom or loneliness. And it was just always distracting myself. And then to be aware of my pattern of being an avoidant. Whether you're overly needy or you're avoidant, either one is a strategy. It's a strategy or a coping mechanism that you took on subconsciously, which means you weren't aware that you took on this pattern very early on. It's how you cope with having unmet needs. And that is nothing to feel bad about. There is no shame in trying to get your needs met. The second step of the 5-step power pathway is ownership. O is for ownership. For me, the ownership was in realizing that no one on the outside could fix this for me. No one on the outside is to blame. No one caused this. The strategy came from my own subconscious mind, and it didn't come from the outside world. It's not like my parents said, okay, Kim, you're going to be an avoidant. We're going to give you this strategy of staying busy to distract yourself from the pain and discomfort you feel when your needs are not met. It happens to us. Ownership is not about blaming anybody. I can't blame my husband, can't blame my parents, I can't blame my kids. I have to take ownership. And when you take ownership, it gives you more power. That's why I call this the 5-step power pathway. Okay, if I don't acknowledge the pattern, then I'm just going to continue recreating the same unmet needs. It's just going to keep going round and round doing the same old. So this step is why I'm sharing this episode with you honestly and hopefully with humility. Okay, so recognize the patterns, take ownership. The third step of the 5-step power pathway is the willingness to feel the discomfort, like having the willingness to feel the pain of the unmet need. And again, for an avoidant, this is very difficult because number one, You have to, first of all, be able to know, what do you need? Like, what is the unmet need, right? Sometimes we can't even identify what it is we're needing in those moments. And I think that was what was so eye-opening for me before sharing this episode with you, was that I didn't even fully grasp that I was using busyness as a distraction because I had an unmet need for connection, love, closeness, and intimacy. Like, isn't that wild? Think about that. How did I even get to the place of being busy, keeping myself busy all the time, doing my checklists, my to-do lists, and just keeping busy with the podcast and social media and other things, and just doing, as I always say, we're human beings, not a human doing. And all of that is just a strategy because I was distracting myself from the true unmet need, which is that I was feeling lonely, disconnected, and I wanted more closeness and intimacy. This is involved in the third step of the willingness to explore, the willingness to heal, the willingness to feel the feelings in order to heal and identify what the need is. For me, as I mentioned early on, some of the things that I was feeling when I slowed down and forced myself to be still so that I could do this inner work, I noticed I was feeling sad, lonely, anxious, disconnected, and melancholy. Let me give you a little bit more context to this. Last week, I had the opportunity to have a couple of days by myself in Florida before I came back to New York for the holidays. I was at the beach, and I also spent some time just in my backyard, and I had all this alone time, which normally I'm pretty stoked about having some alone time. I don't have to think about, what does this one want? What does that one want? For a recovering people pleaser, alone time can seem like paradise. And I was so looking forward to it. That's why I was so surprised to see that what came up for me was this antsiness around having so much quietness, so much stillness, so much downtime. I was like, why am I feeling this way? And then as I just allowed that space, those feelings to come up, what came up for me was the sadness, loneliness, disconnection, and melancholy. And then I tapped in even deeper to these feelings. What I noticed was these feelings were very old and very familiar. I can remember feeling them from the time I was a little girl. I was alone a lot as a little girl. And a lot of the times I didn't mind because I could connect really well with nature. I really connected with nature. But we are also hardwired for connection with other humans. We're meant to be in relationship. And when I couldn't find that connection, that closeness with my family or with my friends, I would feel this deep sense of sadness and loneliness and disconnection. So what do I truly need when I'm getting myself busy and distracted? The unmet need is a need for closeness, for intimacy, for connection, for love, for being understood, for having emotional intimacy with others. That's what I truly desire, and that's what I truly need. So then it's on me to say to myself, what action can I take now to support myself. And then that does segue into the fifth step of the 5-step power pathway. I first need to tell you what the fourth step is. The fourth step is, once I recognize these parts that are wounded, the parts that feel sad, that feel lonely, that feel the melancholy, it's about embracing those wounded parts. The little girl inside me that was just so sad. Honestly, there were times where I would get on my bike and ride through the neighborhood looking for someone to play with, looking for connection. I wanted and needed human connection, and I felt so sad. Something was wrong with me that I couldn't find people to connect with. So it's about holding compassion for those parts of ourselves and validating that, you know what, the strategy that I came up with to perform, perfect, and please makes total sense as to why I would do that. And whatever your strategies are, you can do the same for your wounded part. It makes total sense that we come up with a way that we think is going to protect us from feeling pain. These strategies were just trying to keep us safe. It's about bringing in some softness instead of bringing in criticism, like I did early on by saying someone who is overly needy is weak and pathetic. So that's criticism. That's not softness. That's not compassion, right? That person is just trying to protect herself and get her needs met in any way that she can. So then finally, the fifth step is about taking radical responsibility. This is where you take real action, doing something differently, which this is where I'm still practicing, and it's not easy for me. I can ask the question, how can I meet my need for closeness and connection in a grounded, authentic way? I could probably find a way to meet the need for myself, which I often do, but asking another person to, if they would be willing to meet the unmet need, feels scary because it's such a vulnerable place to be. And especially for those of you who were conditioned to believe that your needs were not important. When you were a child, you learned that your needs were not worthy, they were not important, that it would make sense, that it would be really difficult for you to speak up, like reaching out to friends or loved ones and asking directly for connection or closeness. Whew, it's the work, I know, it's the way, but tell me that doesn't sound just a little bit scary. Yet it's important to learn how to do this, to learn how to let other people know what you need from them. And if they say no, that's the worst case scenario. No, I'm not going to meet your need. Okay, then you ask somebody else, right? It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you because they said no, or that you're unworthy, but that's what we interpret. That's what we end up believing, is that if we ask for someone to meet a need that we have and they say no or they can't, we end up attaching a meaning to that there's something wrong with us. If those feelings come up, you can go back through the process. Let's say you ask someone if they would be willing to meet your need for closeness and connection, and they say no. And then you go to the place of feeling unworthy, rejected, or less than, then you just go right back to the beginning of the 5-step power pathway and you run that through the pathway, because that's another pattern. What is the strategy that you come up with when you feel rejected, unworthy, or less than because someone has said no to your request? Then you go into ownership, willingness to feel, and then embracing, and then Maybe the action is you try again. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is what I want to share, that the real purpose of this episode was to model for you in real time what it looks like to go through and do the inner work. I talk about it in my episodes. You got to do your work, do your work. I've done my inner work. And sometimes some of you might say, what do you mean by that? So I wanted to share with you in real time what it looks like to do the inner work, what it looks like to follow the breadcrumbs for doing the work. Like these emotional breadcrumbs were laid out for me, and I had a choice. I could follow them and see it through and do the work, or I could ignore it, but then I would stay stuck in my pattern of being super busy and never really addressing the discomfort and the pain of the loneliness, of the disconnection. And I would continue to most likely use my business and this podcast as a way to meet my needs from a needy place. And that's never going to work in the end. I wanted to share with you how patterns can get formed in childhood and then show up in all parts of your life, your family, relationships, business, your job. And then also just to encourage you to not abandon yourself when comfortable feelings arise. It's so easy to suppress, to push down, to pretend they don't exist. But when you do, you're abandoning yourself. Just to normalize the messiness of humanity. We're all imperfect. We're all trying to figure these things out. And it's not easy. The journey's not always easy. But at the end of the day, it is so worth it, because I cannot tell you how excited I was to share this episode with you. I was so excited to share my journey and my process with you. And I was more excited that I had a breakthrough. So, oh my God, like I get it. Aha. There's such a good feeling in having clarity, right? They say hindsight is 20/20. So once I had this clarity around what was going on for me, and then I knew immediately what I had to do, I just had to take myself through the 5-step power pathway. Now, does that mean I'm fully healed and okay? Maybe not. Maybe there's another layer. Maybe there's another round. I don't know. But for the moment, I feel like I'm in a higher vibration. I feel more alive. I feel more empowered because I was able to take ownership and do something differently. I definitely have more joy. I'm more creative. That's why I'm doing this episode. And I feel more aliveness. And that's for now, until the next layer of something comes up. We're always growing, we're always healing, and we're always learning. So when you can look at it from that vantage point, you don't feel like a victim. You embrace this work and you embrace every time a new pattern comes up. I just wanted to thank you so much for being here today and for listening to my story and my experience. I hope that it was impactful. I hope that it landed with you in a way that it might inspire you to take a look at some of your own patterns that are showing up for you right now. Maybe you have some underlying sadness as well. Maybe you're feeling disconnected. Maybe you're feeling lonely and you have some unmet needs. And I thought it was really important to address this topic because it's profound. It's happening to many of us, and we tend to ignore the warning signs or red flags and push it under the rug. So I hope this was helpful. And if you did enjoy this episode, or you have questions or comments about anything I shared, please let me know in the comments section. And then finally, I'll say that if you did enjoy it, I would love for you to leave a review on your favorite audio platform. You can leave a star review or a written review. Either one is fine. And it just helps to get this content out to more people that could benefit from everything that I shared here today.
Hey, Kim Gross here. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Masks Off for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. I invite you to hop on over to my website, kimgrosscoaching.com. Right there on the front page, there's a quiz for people pleasers and perfectionists. You can find out if you have tendencies. You can also get into my newsletter where you will be given valuable content every week on different topics I share here in the podcast. And if you really did enjoy this episode, if you found it helpful, if you found it valuable, please go to, if you're on YouTube, go and subscribe. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, then I invite you to leave a review. You can even do a star review. It doesn't have to be a written review. If you know of someone who can benefit from this podcast or this particular episode, please share it with them. I'll see you next time.